The morning began peacefully at the small house in the mountains, with pale sunlight touching the wooden porch and the quiet garden beyond it. Tu Tien was already awake, preparing breakfast while Mother Loy sorted fresh vegetables near the doorway. But Jack had been acting strangely since the previous evening. He checked his phone more often than usual. Each time Tu Tien entered the room, he quickly locked the screen or slipped a device into his pocket. He also disappeared outside several times, speaking in a low voice near the bamboo fence. Tu Tien noticed every detail. For more than 2 years, she and Jack had survived hardships that would have separated many couples. They had faced poverty, misunderstandings, dangerous storms, family conflict, and moments when their future seemed impossible. Jack had always stood beside her when fear became overwhelming. That was why his secrecy now felt so unusual. During breakfast, Tu Tien finally looked across the table and asked, "Is something wrong at the company?" Jack nearly dropped his spoon. "No," he answered too quickly. "Everything is fine." Mother Loy glanced at him with a knowing expression, but said nothing. Tu Tien tried to smile. "You have checked your phone at least 10 times. Jack turned off the screen. I am waiting for an important message, that is all. His explanation did not calm her. Jack usually shared his problems with her, even when they were difficult. If something was happening and he could not tell her, then it had to be serious. After breakfast, Jack announced that he needed to visit the construction site. He told Tu Tien he might return late and asked her not to wait for him. As he walked toward the car, Mother Loy followed him outside. "Have you prepared everything?" she whispered. Jack looked back at the house. Tu Tien was standing near the window, watching them. "Almost," he replied. "The final delivery will arrive this afternoon." Mother Loy smiled. "Then stop looking so frightened. You are making her suspicious." Jack exhaled. "I have negotiated contracts worth millions without feeling this nervous." "This is not a contract," Mother Loy reminded him. "This is the woman you love." Jack nodded and drove away. Inside, Tu Tien had seen their secretive conversation, but could not hear the words. She asked Mother Loy what Jack had said, but the older woman laughed and claimed he had forgotten to buy something for dinner. At the construction site, Jack barely checked the work. Instead, he met Uncle Dung beside a temporary storage building. Inside were sealed boxes, strings of warm lights, white fabric, fresh flowers, and a wooden sign carved by hand. Uncle Dung opened one box and revealed dozens of small glass lanterns. "Everything you requested is here," he said, "but the weather report says there may be rain tonight." Jack looked toward the dark clouds gathering above the mountains. "Then we will finish before it arrives." The two men loaded the decorations into a truck and drove toward a quiet clearing near the forest. It was the same place where Jack and Tu Tien had once made a promise during one of the hardest periods of their lives. Back then, neither knew whether they would have a home, a family, or another peaceful day together. Jack chose the location because it represented the truth of their relationship. Their love had not grown from luxury. It had grown through uncertainty, sacrifice, and the choice to return to one another again and again. By midday, Uncle Dung and several trusted workers had transformed the clearing. Warm lights hung between the bamboo trees. A narrow path was covered with flower petals. Photographs from the couple's journey were attached to wooden frames. Tu Tien in the pineapple garden, Jack repairing the old house, the family sharing meals, and the two of them smiling after surviving the storm. At the end of the path stood a simple table. On it was a small velvet box. Jack opened the box and stared at the ring. It was not the largest or most expensive ring he could have purchased. He had chosen something elegant and modest because it reminded him of Tu Tien. Its value came not from its price, but from the promise behind it. Uncle Dung watched him quietly. "Are you certain?" Jack closed the box. "I have never been more certain of anything." Back at home, Tu Tien found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. Jack did not answer 2 of her calls, and when he finally sent a message, it contained only a few words. "I am busy. Please stay home." She wondered whether Jack was facing financial trouble again. Perhaps something had happened at the construction site. Perhaps he was hiding bad news because he did not want her to worry. Mother Loy tried to distract her by preparing dinner, but Tu Tien kept looking toward the road. Near sunset, a black car stopped outside the gate. Tu Tien stepped onto the porch, expecting Jack. Instead, Uncle Dung got out wearing a clean shirt and carrying a garment bag. "Where's Jack?" she asked. "He is safe," Uncle Dung replied, "but he asked me to bring you somewhere. Why did he not come himself? You will understand soon." Mother Loey emerged from the house, barely hiding a smile. She took the garment bag and handed it to Tu Tien. "Change into this." Inside was a simple cream-colored dress with soft fabric and delicate embroidery around the sleeves. Tu Tien looked from Mother Loey to Uncle Dung. "What are both of you hiding from me?" Mother Loey placed her hands on Tu Tien's shoulders. "For once, stop trying to solve every mystery. Trust Jack." Those words reminded Tu Tien of how many times Jack had asked the same thing during their hardest days. She returned to her room and changed. When she came outside, Mother Loy's eyes filled with tears. "You look beautiful," she said. The car carried Tu Tien toward the forest. The sky was turning orange behind the mountains, but dark clouds were spreading quickly from the west. Tu Tien recognized the road and her heart began to beat faster. Uncle Dung stopped at the entrance to the old forest path. "You must walk from here," he said. Tu Tien stepped out. Small lanterns glowed between the bamboo trees, leading deeper into the clearing. Along the path, she discovered photographs from the last 2 years. Each image brought back a memory, painful days, unexpected laughter, and promises they had refused to break. At the final photograph, she saw a handwritten note. "You gave me a reason to return home." Tu Tien covered her mouth as tears gathered in her eyes. Then she looked ahead. Jack was standing beneath the warm lights, waiting for her with a small box held tightly in his hand. For several seconds, Tu Tien could not move. The clearing looked completely different from the quiet place she remembered. Warm lanterns swayed gently between the bamboo trees, casting soft light across the flower-covered path. Photographs of their journey surrounded her, each one preserving a moment Jack had apparently never forgotten. At the center of it all, Jack stood alone. His carefully arranged hair had already been disturbed by the rising wind, and despite the calm expression he was trying to maintain, Tu Tien could see how nervous he was. His hands held the small velvet box so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. Tu Tien slowly approached him. "Is this what you have been hiding from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack gave a nervous smile. "Part of it." She glanced at the photographs and the glowing lanterns. "I thought something terrible had happened." "I know," Jack said. "I handled the secret badly. You ignored my calls. I was afraid I would reveal everything the moment I heard your voice." Tu Tien wanted to be angry, but the emotion in Jack's eyes made that impossible. She stopped only a few steps away from him. The wind moved through the bamboo leaves, creating a soft whisper around them. Jack looked toward the photographs lining the path. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" he asked. Tu Tien nodded. It had been during one of the most uncertain periods of their lives. Jack had lost nearly everything, and Tu Tien did not know whether they would ever have a stable home. They had stood at the edge of the forest while heavy rain gathered over the mountains. That day, Jack had promised that no matter what happened, he would always return to her. "I remember," she said quietly. Jack took a slow breath. "I made you that promise when I had nothing, no company, no security, and no idea what our future would look like. All I had was the hope that you would believe me." Tu Tien's eyes began to fill with tears. "You believed me even when I gave you very few reasons to," he continued. "You stayed when my life became difficult. You forgave me when fear made me silent, and whenever I lost the courage to keep moving, you reminded me why I needed to stand again." He stepped closer. "Everything I have rebuilt means nothing if I cannot share it with you." Tu Tien covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. Jack lowered himself onto one knee. The moment he opened the velvet box, the first drops of rain began to fall. Inside was a delicate ring that reflected the warm light from the lanterns. It was elegant rather than extravagant, with a simple design that felt completely different from the expensive gifts Jack could easily have chosen. "Tu Tien," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "I cannot promise that our lives will always be peaceful. We both know better than anyone that storms can appear without warning." A drop of rain landed on his cheek. "But I can promise that you will never face them alone. I will return to you, stand beside you, and choose you every day that I am given." His voice grew more emotional. "Will you marry me and build the rest of this life with me?" Tu Tien stared at him through her tears. For a moment, Jack's confidence disappeared completely. He searched her face, terrified by the silence. Then Tu Tien began to laugh and cry at the same time. "Yes," she whispered. Jack remained frozen. She nodded quickly. "Yes, Jack, of course I will marry you." Relief transformed his face. He carefully placed the ring on her finger and rose to his feet. Tu Tien immediately wrapped her arms around him, and Jack held her as though he had been waiting his entire life for that moment. From behind the bamboo trees, Mother Law, Uncle Dung, and several workers stepped into the clearing, clapping and cheering. Tu Tien pulled away from Jack in surprise. "You were all involved?" Mother Law laughed as she approached them. Someone had to make sure Jack did not ruin his own plan. Jack raised an eyebrow. "I did not ruin anything. You made her believe the company was collapsing," Mother Lowe replied. Even Tu Tien laughed at that. The rain quickly became heavier, forcing everyone beneath the temporary shelter Uncle Dung had prepared nearby. Far from destroying the evening, the storm made it feel more meaningful. The sound of rain against the roof surrounded them, while the lanterns continued glowing beyond the shelter. Mother Loy held Tu Tien's hand and examined the ring. "It is beautiful," she said. Tu Tien looked at Jack. "It is perfect." Uncle Dung opened a bottle of sparkling juice, and the group raised their cups to celebrate. There was no luxurious banquet, no grand hall, and no crowd of important guests. There were only the people who had witnessed Jack and Tu Tien struggle, separate, forgive, and find their way back to each other. For them, that was enough. Later, after the rain weakened, Jack and Tu Tien walked alone along the edge of the clearing. The workers had begun gathering the photographs and protecting the decorations from the weather. Tu Tien looked down at the ring again. "You really chose this place because of the promise?" Jack nodded. "This was where I first understood that you are not simply part of my life. You were the reason I still wanted a future." Tu Tien rested her head against his shoulder. "I was afraid today," she admitted. "When you kept hiding your phone, I thought you had received terrible news." Jack's expression became serious. "I am sorry." She looked at him. "No more secrets. No more secrets," he promised. At that exact moment, Jack's phone began ringing. Tu Tien glanced at him and smiled. "You should answer it before I become suspicious again." Jack took out the phone. The smile on his face faded when he saw the screen. The number was unknown. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A woman's voice spoke rapidly from the other end. Jack's expression changed almost immediately. Tu Tien watched the color leave his face. "What happened?" she asked. Jack did not respond. He listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the forest. After several seconds, he said, "Are you certain?" The caller answered. Jack ended the conversation slowly. Tu Tien stepped in front of him. "Jack, tell me what is wrong." He looked toward Mother Loy and Uncle Dung, who had noticed the sudden change and were approaching them. "That was the hospital," Jack said. The happiness of the evening disappeared beneath a wave of fear. "Who is in the hospital?" Mother Loy asked. Jack looked at Tu Tien, struggling to find the right words. "A patient was brought in after collapsing near the old mountain road," he explained. "The doctors found my number among his belongings." Tu Tien frowned. "Why would he have your number?" Jack swallowed. "Because he was carrying a photograph of you." No one spoke. The remaining lanterns moved in the wind as another distant sound of thunder echoed across the mountains. Tu Tien's fingers tightened around Jack's hand. "Who is he?" Jack looked directly into her eyes. The doctors do not know his full identity. But before he lost consciousness, he repeatedly said your name. Tu Tien's heart began to race. Jack continued. He also said he knows the truth about your biological father. The words seemed to erase every sound around them. Only minutes earlier, Tu Tien had believed the greatest surprise of her life was the ring on her finger. Now an unknown man was waiting in a hospital, carrying her photograph and claiming to possess the answer to the mystery that had followed her for years. Jack closed his hand around hers. We need to go. Tu Tien looked once more at the glowing clearing where they had promised to build a future together. Then she turned toward the waiting car. Their engagement had marked the beginning of a new chapter, but before that chapter could truly begin, the past had returned to demand the truth.